Hello, everybody. Today's review is going to be of a movie called Train Dreams, which I gave a 6 out of 10 to. Although I didn't rate it down, I guess, but it is what it is. I rated it over on IMDb. So this was a bit of a slower paced movie for sure than what I thought it was going to be from the trailer. But they kind of set the tone of the movie, I guess, from the beginning, as you're going to be following basically one character's life, and kind of like how he lived. Now, I thought it was going to be a bit more exciting, maybe a bit more of a Western themed than I thought, but it is what it is. Not every movie is going to be what I expect it to be, I guess. So, yeah, we're following this character called Robert Grenier throughout the movie, and so we'll get more into that, but we'll go over the casting list first. Now, Joel Edgerton was the one who played Robert Grenier, and I do really enjoy his acting. Like everything else I've seen him in, I've enjoyed. But I just felt like this was a little bit slow, even near the end. Like I know that obviously the story behind it was supposed to be, not to say that the story. I'm not trying to take away anything from the story. It just felt a little bit, you know, it was a lot different than what I was expecting, I guess. So yeah, not my favorite movie of all time, but definitely one that I would say, give it a watch and see what you think. Apparently, it's up for a Emmy, I think. It's an Emmy nominee, so it must be doing good. It's somewhere, obviously. And then we had Clifton Collins Jr., who played Boomer. Felicity Jones, who played Gladys Grenier, but that wasn't her original. That was not her maiden name. So we'll talk about that too. William H. Macy, who played Arden Peoples. Carrie Condon, who played Claire Thompson. Zoe Short, who played Kate, his daughter. But again, I'm not really sure. Like, she returns years later, and he thinks that it's his daughter anyway. But we'll talk about that a little bit more too. And then John Deal, who played Billy. So I guess he lived quite a long life, 80 years. Like, to some people, maybe that's not a long time, but 80 years does seem like a pretty fruitful life anyway. Especially in the early 1900s. Like he didn't pass away until 1968, and of course he was he spent 80 years in Modest Ferry, Idaho, or I believe that's at least how you would pronounce it. He seemed pretty well traveled, even though he talked about not being as well traveled as maybe some people. But I guess he traveled far enough in the States where he was traveled west a few miles from the Pacific and east as far as this little town called Libby, 40 miles inside of Montana. So he'd done quite a bit of traveling, obviously, because he was a logger. So wherever the job took him, like whatever state the job told him to go to, that's where he would be assigned, right? And him and his wife had this little cabin going on. Now, he had dropped out of school when he was in his teens, and originally he had traveled to Fry, Idaho at the age of, he was either 6 or 7, the narrator said. So, not very old. He didn't know who his real parents were. Didn't even know like his own birth date. Dropped out of school when he was a teenager. And then finally he meets Gladys Oakley. That was her maiden name. Now he starts working for the Spokane International Railroad, building the Robertson Gorge Bridge in 1917. Now I don't really know. I don't really think he stuck working for the railroad. He ended up working for this logging company, and maybe that was part of it. I'm not really sure, but he was obviously making pretty good money because him and his wife, him and Gladys, were thinking about, uh, you know, what was it, building um, their own sawmill. So like they were steps away from basically having like their own lives, their own business, sort of thing. Like that was his ultimate goal, his dream. I guess you could say it's where the Train Dreams titles come from, right? Uh, so yeah, now he had this idea that death was kind of following him, I guess, or all these bad omens were following him because when he was working for the railroad building the bridge, they threw one of the men off of the bridge for whatever reason. I'm not really sure. They never really touched on that. He was just kind of asking what that guy had done, and he just gets thrown off. Now, I'm not really sure the reasoning behind it. They don't really touch on that much, but it didn't seem like there was any wrongdoing. Now, who knows? Maybe he stole from somebody. Maybe there was something else going on. Who knows? They never really touched on that very much, but yeah. So after that, I guess he maybe felt guilty a little bit, like he could have maybe done more to prevent that from happening. Um, but yeah, just an unfortunate circumstance. And then, of course, they lose three men in a logging operation when the log rolls down the hill. And then, of course, Arn gets hit by a falling tree branch and loses his memory, and then he passes away. I think it was a few days later or something like that. Um, and then, of course, he thinks that it's slowly catching up with him, right? And then he comes back to his hometown, and of course, he's built this little cabin out in the woods where him and Gladys stay with their daughter Kate. And now there's this forest fire. So he unfortunately loses his wife and child to a forest fire, which is something no parent should ever have to go through. It's bad enough losing your wife, but no parent should ever have to bury their child. I can only imagine the feeling of that and what that would be like, and especially when you don't know, like if they've if they've passed away, like if they're dead, if they're still alive. Like he searched for quite a long time, and of course he ended up staying basically out in the forest, sleeping on the ground, hoping that maybe one day they would return. And eventually he ended up building a new cabin for himself. I think right where the original one was. Now, it took him a long time before he rebuilt the bedroom, but throughout this movie, he has like this really strange, like it's almost like sometimes they're hallucinations and sometimes they're dreams. So sometimes it was hard to differentiate like whether he was in a dream state or not, but he always had this dream of like this train going down the track, and then I guess like the people that had passed away were always on the track, and then he would wake up, sort of thing. And of course, the one guy that died when he was building the bridge always seemed to kind of haunt him, and he thought that was the reason that all this bad stuff had been following him and happening to him slowly. And of course, at one point in the movie, he even gets hit by a tree branch, and I was like, "Oh my god, this is going to be how he goes out too, just like Arn. Like it's finally catching up with him." But he was fortunate enough to live a long life, even though it probably was lonely. And he does down the road meet Claire, who worked as a nurse in the Great War, they said, and now she was, I think, a surveyor to help track like wildfires and obviously cite them early on so that they could be prevented, right? Back in those days, though, I don't know how easy that would have been because this was like before internet and cell phones and all that. So I almost feel like she would have had to get a ride back to town and then let them know that the fire was there. And by that time, it could have spread, who knows how far, right? Sort of thing. So he kind of worked as like a chauffeur almost for a bunch of people. And it was the Pinkhams, I think, that he worked for. And I think he bought the horses and the buggy off of them, I believe the narrator said. And worked at that for a little while, obviously because it was a lot closer to home, right? He didn't want to be a logger anymore after he saw the condition that Billy was in. So Billy was one of the guys that worked with Arn and him too, like a few years back. And he's having a conversation with him, and Billy asks him how Arn is, even though Billy was there when Arn had passed away. So he can kind of see like where his life is going. And of course, I guess he got to see a little bit of the spaceship going like outside of Earth. And I'm not really sure, would that have been an Apollo mission? I don't know. When did Apollo, like he passed away in November of 1968, so was Apollo before that, or was there another mission before Apollo where they traveled outside of the Earth? Because, yeah, they weren't touching down on the moon, so I don't think, it's hard to say, like, what one that would have been in 19, like, it would have had to be before 1960, Was it 1967? I'm gonna have to look that up. Like, what was the first mission? What was the first rocket that was launched out of orbit? Interesting to think about. But yeah, yeah. I guess I don't really know my NASA history that well as I should, I guess. Um, Now, there's obviously a lot of speculation about that, but that could be a whole a whole different video going into theories and stuff about what actually happened. But anyway, um, yeah. So I'm not really sure exactly what one that would have been, but anyway, he was able to see like what Earth looked like from the outside, I guess, or as well as we'll know what Earth looks like from the outside because we can only we can only speculate uh, like what it could possibly look like based on the photos we've seen and so on and so forth, right? Like most of us won't ever travel outside of the Earth's orbit in our lifetime, so we can only believe what we're being told. Um, and of course, it's always important to question those sorts of things too. But yeah, I guess we've seen photos of like skyscrapers and stuff being built, where we see the curvature of the Earth. So yeah, it's cool, all cool stuff like that. But yeah, I guess I'm kind of going off on a little bit of a rant here, or yeah, just talking about him being able to see just the outside of the Earth. It's even from somebody else's point of view would just be a cool thing to see, especially when it's live, right? Now there was one scene here where he believes that his daughter returns. There's some girl that falls outside of his cabin, and again at this point he's questioning whether it's even happened or not, right? Just like a lot of the things that he's seen and heard, like he hears his wife and daughter calling him all the time, and he doesn't want to turn his head because then he's afraid that even that little piece of what he has might disappear, and so he believes that that was his daughter. But again, he searches like the forest for 3 days and finds no sign. He sets out food outside of the cabin, but there's nobody ever returns. So he gets to fly in a plane, I guess, just before his death, and I guess he finally comes to like terms with everything and finally feels like at peace. So I guess that's what they say, right? When you finally feel like everything is connected and aligned and you're at peace, um, in your old age, that's when you kind of realize that you can let go. It's such a weird thing to think about because I'm still so far away from that. But yeah, definitely brought some tears to my eyes at the end of the movie for sure, because it's just like, even though this wasn't my necessarily favorite movie, it definitely had a powerful message about you never know what can happen in life, so you kind of gotta enjoy every little bit of it that you can, no matter what, for sure. So yeah, that's my review for this movie. I think I've touched on everything that I possibly can, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye bye for now.